Well, hello everybody, it's Riffraff Hornhelm, and I'm here with another presentation from the Dwarven Vault, and today we have a monster review, and we're once again delving into the world of the original monster manual, that, this little guy right here, and we're talking about entry-level monsters, as was designed for the original AD&D, which of course this year turns 50. Woohoo! Youngsters hate youngsters. And it is a wonderful place to understand some of the early dungeoning that was done by adventuring parties and what they were up against, and many of the created creatures that exist specifically for subterranean adventures. Today, we're going to talk about the Gelatinous Cube. Can't get anything that's more designed for D&D than the Gelatinous Cube. Hate to say it. Now, there's a lot of discussion about the Gelatinous Cube, which frankly is a very, very simple creature. It's a 10 by 10 by 10 foot cube, generally. It doesn't mean that it fills up every corridor that it's in. Corridors can be in different sizes, but the cube itself is 10 by 10 by 10. Yes, it can adjust a little for the space that it's in, but you have to think of it as kind of a dungeon Roomba. It motors around inside of a dungeon, and it eats stuff on one end and essentially poops it out the other. It's not really poop, it just kind of passes through it and gets dropped the other side. And those are the non-digestible items. That's going to be things like armor, swords, treasure, bones, but for flesh, it will dissolve it. It'll eat it, digest it as it passes through. Combined with this, it'll also paralyze you, or at least try. When you get touched by a gelatinous cube, you have to roll save versus paralyzation. It's okay. A lot of times, if you are paralyzed, you tend to be around fellow party members who can pull you out again. And frankly, getting caught by a gelatinous cube is usually just a unfortunate circumstance, an error of some kind on the player's part, or the circumstance that they were in that caused them to get hit by one of these gelatinous cubes. Now, recently I saw a YouTube where it talked about the fact that, well, it had to be 10 by 10 because the only way that they knew how to draw dungeons back then were on quadrille paper, so quarter-inch squares, in order to come up with the design for it. It actually is kind of more than that. Remember that Dungeons & Dragons came from the world of essentially miniatures gaming. And in miniatures gaming, whether you were playing stock games like the Avalon Hill games or something like that, all of them have a movement, how far you can go, and they'll have a range for whatever it is that you're doing. In the case of D&D, it's casting a spell or shooting an arrow or something of that nature. And also the movement will have a range in terms of how far you can move that round. Quadrille paper and hexagon paper were the two ways that were used to measure off distances for any game. It wasn't just D&D. It was an overlay of some kind that would be on a paper map, or it would be a gridded overlay that would go over a terrain map, but you still had to know distances, you still had to know range, attack, defense, movement. There were statistics involved, just like D&D. Now, D&D obviously changed the background that everybody worked against, but really the reason that it's on quadrille paper is that, well, that's what was available. And it gave a way of giving perspective to the players in terms of distance traveled, how far they could travel, how far they could throw their fireballs or shoot their arrows, whatever it may be. Very, very important. And the gelatinous cube was definitely an outgrowth of that. I have that on very great authority, having been around a fair amount during that time. Uh, there's no question that it was designed just for dungeon crawling. So once again, if you're going to look at a creature that best defines D&D and was designed only for D&D, gelatinous cube is, to me, at the top of the list. Now, in terms of danger, not very dangerous. Avoidable. Very avoidable. From a creature perspective, one of the lower level ones, yes, fire makes it very unhappy. You can get rid of these. They're not impossible to kill. They're much more fun to let wander and follow because they often pick up things of value that they squirt out later that, as a player, give you things that you can pick up treasure-wise that actually can be quite valuable. Potion bottles, things like this, they don't get digested. Now, if you talk to players and say, hey, what kind of danger level do you see in a gelatinous cube? And the answer almost inevitably is like a 1, maybe a 2. From a dungeon master standpoint, I wouldn't make them any more dangerous, but I do think they're more useful than they get credit for in terms of how they can spread wealth throughout a long abandoned dungeon that is populated by gelatinous cubes. So, once again, this is, to me at least, the epitome of created creatures for the game of AD&D. And I was very pleased to see one in the movie. That was very nice. I wish that they had handled it a little bit differently, but it's okay. It was well done. I enjoyed it. If you are a DM and you haven't used a gelatinous cube, even if you don't want to have your party encounter it, it's great for redistribution of wealth within your dungeon. It's good to have them travel around and move things to different places. Sometimes places that are no longer accessible, and other times places that were inaccessible now are. So, try using a gelatinous cube in your next dungeon. And if you're a player and you get killed by a gelatinous cube, well, yeah, send me an email. I need a good laugh. It's really hard to get killed by these because you rarely get into a circumstance where you can't. I think they're very useful for players because they filter the stuff that they find in the dungeon through themselves and make it more accessible for players, especially low-level players. So that's our take on the gelatinous cube. I hope you've enjoyed this informative video. Well, I don't know that it really informed that much, but if nothing else, it gave you some more history. If you like what you saw, please give us a thumbs up. Come back and subscribe. Definitely see us again in the future. And remember, dwarves rock!